What's up guys, this is Kim from EinfachMachen and I'm really excited to share with you in this video how you can bulk create multiple PDF reports. In this video we will do 50 at a time with just one click within your Power App. So stay tuned. So first of all, I wanted to say thank you especially to the Cloud Couch Rocks, which is hosted by Stefan Riedel and Tomislav Karafilo. All these guys who attend there each Friday pointed me into the right direction and challenged my way of executing or building this flow. So thank you very much, and also the Power Platform community, which gave me lots of information how to build this flow. So before building this stuff, let's first have a look on the use case. So we have the Marmon company who builds houses, and they're bricklayers. They spend their working hours on projects, and these hours are recording using a Power App. Certain contractors require a PDF report for each month showing the working hours on the specific project for the complete month. So CEO Hans Mauermann wants to be able to create all PDF reports for the month with just one click. And for this, we want to create a workflow that gets triggered from Power Apps and creates a report for each project. So basically, this is what it could look like. I've tested it with the creation of, I think, 150 PDF reports I've created and just sent them to this mailbox. And now let's have a look on the workflow. So first of all, our Hans Mauermann selects the data for all the projects for the current month in his Power App. And yes, this could also be automated, but I wanted to keep it simple and making it work in the first place. And then he clicks Create Reports button, and the parent flow gets triggered, which receives the JSON from Power Apps. And I call this flow the Aggregator because what it basically does, it parses the JSON, selects the needed columns, maybe there are columns we do not want to have in our report, selects the unique projects, and triggers also a child flow. So this is the one-to-many table we have, the unfiltered content of different reports, let's call it like this. We have project A, B, C, D, A, B, D again, and the different working hours, and maybe also other columns we do not need. And our flow creates a second array of unique projects so that we know how many reports we do have to create. The number, the count rows of this table is basically the number of reports that need to be generated. So after this flow is finished and aggregated all the data, the first child flow gets triggered, parses the JSON of unique and one-to-many values, and then loops through each project, so basically through this list, and creates a JSON object for each project. I call this the Selector. I've called it packages, so it builds packages per project. So we've got all the working hours for project A, all the working hours for project B, project C, and so on. And if we have 50 reports, then 50 arrays get created through a loop. And also for each package of data, for each project, basically another child flow gets triggered. And this is the third flow, the PDF Creator. And this is where we basically just receive the data for each project. So if we have 50 reports, this flow gets triggered 50 times. And then a Word document template gets populated. I will show you how you can create a Word document template as well in this video. And what I really like about this functionality, that you can do great personalization. So if the company wants to use a specific format, it's quite simple to set this up with a Word template. And then this Word template gets converted into a PDF and sent to an email account. And then Hans Mauermann receives all the reports. So he would basically get 50 emails if he selects 50 reports. And yes, we could also automate this and send each report to the specific contractor. But in this video, we want to keep it simple. This is what this report could look like. And through this Word document, you can really personalize this the way you want to do it. So what we will cover in this video today, we will set up a simple Power App where we can create this data grid. Then we will set up the Word template for populating it with grid data. I have to say at this point, working with the Word template as well as converting the Word template afterwards to PDF is a premium functionality in Power Automate. If you're looking for a way to do this without the premium licensing, then this might be not the right video for you. We will set up 3 flows. So the parent flow, our aggregator, the child flow, the selector for the different packages of data, and the last one is the PDF creator. And afterwards we would test this whole thing with the creation of 50 reports with just one click in our Power App. So let's get started. Okay, so in the first place we will create a data set that we will send from our Power App to our flow. And for this I've created a quite simple data set set of projects that we will take as a sample data. I've used GPT to create these projects, so that's a quite nice way to get some sample data. And now in the first place I will insert just a button here, create my first collection with the project, all project, and just insert these 50 projects in here. I've used some Excel formulas, format this in a nice way, and you can see that my collection is already finished. See it as a data source here, call projects, there it is. And what we will do next is we insert a text input where we can enter the number of records we want to create for testing our data. Give it a hint text, and now we will create the second collection, but with the collect, because we want to use a for all and the sequence function to leverage some sample data. I will call this call time tracking, clear this collection and start with the for all. And here's my sequence. And now I want to define the number of records based on the text input. I want to start at 0 and go in a step of 1. And now I will collect my data. Start with the collection name called time tracking and select my first column. We'll call this project. And now we will use the shuffle function to shuffle between the different records of our sample data so that we just get some different projects into our data here. So call this working hours, and we will, just to simplify this, also do just a short sequence here. Start at 3 hours and end at 10 hours, go at a step of 1. So this needs to be sequence, of course, and this is what our sample data looks like. It's not that complicated, but just to give a simple example how you can create your own sample data for creating this flow to test it and to verify it. So I will now select 500 records, and this should create a collection of 500 items. This looks good, but there's a problem because I've chosen the sequence, because this is basically a table. I could also use the shuffle function here to shuffle between the different values. Let's give it another try and have a look on our collection. This looks pretty good. We've got a project name and we've got the working hours. So we can also present this data in a short gallery just to get an idea of how the data looks like in the gallery. And now we can do a count rows on this collection or on the gallery just to verify that we've got our 500 rows. This looks good. And let's also check how many different projects we've got in here. So for this we can use the distinct function, call time tracking, and look for the distinct projects, do a count rows, and we can see we've got 50 different projects. So all the projects entered in the first collection are in this, what means that if we create a flow now, we also should get 50 reports. So that's basically the Power App. Okay, in the next step we will create the Word template that we will use to populate later with our Power Automate flow with the data we've just created in our Power App. And for this we will put this document on a SharePoint website, the SharePoint website where you would like to save this template. And in my case I would just create a document library, call it PDF reports, click on create, and in the next step I would just create a new Word document and open this in the desktop app. And depending on whether you have already used the developer tools in Word, you might see a developer ribbon here. In my case I haven't used this on this virtual machine, so I have to add this. I go on options and then I can edit the menu ribbon and look for the developer tools. There it is. I think it's called developer tools in English. I'm currently using the German version of Word, and now I can insert these controls into my Word template. So first I will change the layout to a landscape mode. Now I will create a really simple table to populate this with the data later. So this is the header for the project, and this is the working hours. Give it a little formatting, and now I can select this cell here and go to developer tools and select the plain text control. What I now can do is rename this. I will call this Word project. Select this also as the tag name, and next I can select this cell and also insert a plain text control, I think it is. Select the properties and insert Word working hour. And now what we need to do as the last step, we select this whole row, and now we can select this content control, I think it is in English, because this is what we need to create the data grid so that we can create multiple rows in this table and not just a static value for one cell or one value. So select this, and now this repeating control is put around these two values we've just created, and we will call this this rep control, and that's basically all we need to do. We'll give it a better name, call it template PDF report. This is already saved to our SharePoint, and now we can select this Word template later in our flow to populate it with the data we've sent from Power Apps in the JSON format. Now it's getting funny because we've done with our Power App, we also set up the Word template, and in the next step we will create the parent flow. So let's get started with this. So the first step is that I create a new instant flow. I've called this parent bulk report PDF create and just enter the description what this flow basically does. I would recommend to you using the V2 Power Apps trigger because you can enter these inputs here that I can now use in my Power App to hand the JSON over to the flow. And in the next step, I would just enter a simple compose action that composes my string or my JSON that I've sent from Power Apps. Just enter this compose and select the var JSON because that's my JSON that I've sent from my Power App. In the next step, we will connect this flow to our Power App. And for this, we select add flow, and there it is, the parent bulk create PDF report. Enter a new button. So this is the button for create sample data. The second one is responsible for triggering the flow. We call this generate PDF report. All we need to do now in our Power App is run this flow. So we call them with the name of the flow, and now we can hear the var JSON that we can send to our flow now. And this is basically just the collection with a JSON function or JSON formula around it. So I have this called time tracking collection, and I will send it over to my flow. And now trigger the flow by clicking on it. And now let's have a look whether the flow has run, and this looks good to me. And now we can see here's the data that we want to process now in our flow. And before clicking on edit, we will copy this output. Then we click on edit and now enter the next step to pass this JSON. Select the pass JSON and let the JSON schema generate from the sample that we've just copied. Click on done, and that's all we need to do to have a proper JSON schema that we can use now. So we will use the outputs from our compose. In this case, working hours, I would change this into a number because we could also have decimal places in here. Now we will test the flow again with a recently used trigger and check whether the parsing works properly. This looks also good. So we now have a body with the JSON, and we have a project, we have the working hours. Now we can continue with our flow. So in the next step, we want to generate the second table with the unique values of projects that we have in this JSON. And for this, I enter a select action. It's just a data operation, and I want to select from the past JSON the body, and then like just the project column because that's the column that I want to unify. And now in the next step, we will enter another compose and call this compose unique projects. And for this, we can use the expression called union. And now we will select the body of the select function 2 times. And now to verify that this works fine, we can create 2 variables. The one is the variable we will calculate the count rows for the complete collection. So all the rows we have in our collection from Power Apps. So we will call this just count all rows and select the length function and use the body from the past JSON. So that's the first step. And now we will copy this and insert this as the next step from our clipboard. And in this variable, we want to count only the unique project. So count unique project. Change this formula. Don't want to use the body from the past JSON, but from the second compose action we've used here. Select the output. Now let's save the flow. So there's a problem. Of course, I have to change the name. I can't use it twice. We'll call this var count unique project and test the whole thing. And as we can see now, the whole collection has 500 rows. So basically what we've defined here, and we've generated a sample data set of 15 different projects. And so here are 50 projects in our JSON. So we unified it using the select and the union function, so we get the unique number of projects, what is basically number of reports that we want to generate. Now we can click again on edit, and we will use the scope action to group these different steps into one scope. So we can just drag and drop all these actions in here. Now we'll call this the main scope, and what I now will enter is a second scope, and this one is responsible for the exception handling. So if we've got an error, then we can send an email based on the error that was sent from the flow. So the first thing that we want to do is configure this run after, so that this exception handling only runs if there's an error with the main scope. So has failed or has timeout might be the two best options for this. And now I will create an HTML table. There it is. And I can create this HTML table from the result of my main scope. So I just need to enter result main, and can also create it automatically based on the columns that are in this result array, or create it custom based, so I can select the different columns that I want to use. In this case, we will keep it to automatic. And then I want to send an email with the table of errors to a mailbox. So select the send an email, use the proper email address, and to provide a link to the specific flow run, we can just create this little concat function. Let's have a look on this. So we concat the Power Automate URL with the workflow expression to get the environment name. Afterwards, there's /flows/ and then workflow name. So that's just the unique name of this workflow. And then we can select the runs and select the appropriate run that has failed. So I found this on the internet. I will leave it in the video description how you can concat this workflow URL so that you can access this just by clicking on the link. We will have a look on this right now. And also I insert my HTML table here, save the whole thing. Now we will test this again and force an error by providing a null value for the project. So that's the whole JSON, just copied it to my clipboard, and I will just leave this one empty here so that the format is also invalid. And let's have a look on this. So we can see there's the action that failed, and our exception handling worked properly and created a table telling us that there was an error. And here we can see the error, and also you can see that here's the flow run. And when I copy this to my clipboard and enter it again, then I get directed directly into the run that had this exception. And now I can have a look on the flow and identify where the problem is. One thing we should also take care of is that if this flow fails, so if it runs into this exception handling scope, then we should terminate the flow that this flow has failed. Therefore, we can insert this terminate control or action, set it to failed, save this flow, because otherwise, like in our test we did previously, the flow run actually failed, but it says us flow run was successfully because we did not terminate the flow, even though we had this error and the exception handling was the scope that had run, because this scope had an error. So always terminate the flow, that the flow run also fails, and we can see which runs were successfully and which runs were not successfully. Test this again now, and as we can see, we now run into this exception handling and the flow run set to flow run failed. Okay, so we managed to build our flow, got this main scope, composing all the data, aggregating all the JSON data that got sent from our Power Apps, and we also implemented an exception handling to get notified if there's an error, if there's an exception with our flow. And now let's continue with our second flow, selecting the correct data. And just as a quick reminder, the first flow was basically to aggregate all the data we've got sent from Power App from our user. And now in the second flow, we will create the different packages. So here we've created the one-to-many table, or analyzed it, and created a unique table with a unique number of projects or number of reports we want to generate. And in this second flow, we will now select the different packages. So for each project, we will select the appropriate data and afterwards send it to the last flow, the PDF creator. Before we will create the second flow, one thing to keep in mind is if we want to work with child flows, because we want to run child flow from another flow, then we have to create a solution for this. Solution is always important to bundle the different data sources, apps and automations you have, especially when calling child flows. This is required for this use case. So in the first step, we will create a new solution. I will call this, I'll create PDF report, select a publisher, or create a new publisher, save this publisher, and now I can select the publisher here. And in the first step, I will add the existing cloud flow, or instant flow in this case. Now we can see the parent flow, import this one. And now from within this solution, I will create The next instant cloud flow is click on create, manually trigger the flow because we will trigger it based on our parent flow and call this child bulk create PDF report. I will use the same name as the parent flow, make a prefix so that I know that it's a child flow, and give it a functional description because we will select the data we need to create the PDF report in the third step. Click on create, and in the first step I will add 2 inputs. So the first input is for the unique values I've got from my previous parent flow, so the number of project, we'll enter it here. And the second text input is the JSON one-to-many, so in this case this is the time tracking JSON. So these are my 2 inputs, and in the first step we will create an apply to each loop, and here we will use the JSON expression and select the unique values because we want to create a package of data for each project in this case. And after that we will create a filter array action, and here we will filter the one-to-many table with all the records in it, and we will filter based on the project. So we will select item project equals, and in this case we need the projects from the apply to each loop. So this is basically apply to each. Save this one, and now we will go back to our parent flow and we will test if this works properly. So here's the parent flow. Click on edit, and before testing, of course, we need to insert the run child flow action and select the correct flow. Therefore we will search for run child flow, and if everything works properly and all the flows are in the solution, then we can see this run a child flow action here. And now we can select our child flow. There it is. Select this one, and now we can also see both inputs that we need to provide to the run child flow. So the first one is the unique project, and we need to provide this in a string. Use the string expression and select the unique projects. That's very important. And also the one-to-many table, so our time tracking record. Therefore we also need the string expression here. And now select the body from our parse JSON. Click on OK. And as we can see now, we've got an error because we did not provide a response to our parent flow. So in the next step, we click on edit child flow in a new tab. And as we can see, we only added filter array. And in the next step, we will add the response. There it is. Click on save. Take a look back into our flow. And now we can see the first error disappeared, and there's only one warning which tells us use connection references, and that's the second step we will do now. Connection references make it easier for us to provide proper application lifecycle management because we do not have a fixed connection but can provide dynamic values to this. Hopefully I explained this the right way, but this is how it looks to me. As you can see here, there's the connection Kim at Mofashop, and we want to replace this with a connection reference. And therefore we go back to our solution, and within our solution we can click on new, more, and connection reference. And now we can create a connection reference. I will call this Outlook connection reference. Also give it the same description. Now I can select the appropriate connector and look for Outlook. There it is, Outlook 365 or Office 365 Outlook. Now I can choose a connection or create a new connection. In my case, I would just create the connection from my email account. Click on create. Now you maybe need to authenticate. And now this connection is added. You can see there are 3 connections in my dev environment. Now I can refresh this one, select the appropriate connection, click on create. And now a new connection reference is created, and you can see there's a new item in here. It's called Outlook connection reference. We can close these windows, and now we will go back into our flow, click on edit in a new tab. Still a warning that we need to use connection references, and we will click on this. And now you can see that here's the warning, but here's the Outlook connection reference. So that one we've defined here. And now we can select this one, and now everything looks fine. And as you can see, there's another name. It's called Outlook connection reference with the email address, in this case kim@mofashop.de. And when we deploy this solution from one to another environment or tenant, we can just adjust these connection reference so that this is set dynamically. Imagine if we have 10 or 20 flows in this solution, so we could adjust this by just changing the connection reference instead of going into all these different flows and set the connection manually in this action. So there's a big advantage in using connection references, and I would highly recommend using them to you. And now we can move on with creating this second flow. And because this flow is only responsible for creating this apply to each loop to create a set of data for each project, we're almost done with creating this flow. So what I would recommend to you in the next step is create this scope action. And as we did in the previous flow, we will call this main, insert our apply to each loop and our response. And now I would go back to the parent flow because we named this all in the same way like in our parent flow. So this is the main scope and this also the main scope. We can just click on copy to clipboard for our exception handling and insert the new step, select my clipboard, exception handling, insert the exception handling. Now we just need to configure it as we did in the parent flow, that this runs after the previous action had failed. Click on done. And now we've implemented within seconds the exception handling for our second flow. So the last step we need to perform in this flow is we also need to create this child flow action, because with our third flow, now we finally create or bulk create these PDF documents. But before adding the run child flow action, we of course need to create the third flow. And that's the next step. We'll create a new instant cloud flow as we did in the previous steps. So I will again use the child as a prefix, use this functional name as flow name, and then a functional description. I will manually trigger this flow based on our first child flow. And now there are again some information that we need from our parent flow. And of course, these information are the one-to-many JSON. So we click on select and we'll give it the same name. And this is the JSON schema. So finally, this flow will run in our example 50 times because we have 50 reports to be generated. And in our apply to each loop, we will trigger this flow. So in the next step, we will create just a simple compose action to test our flow a first time, and we will just select the input from the trigger body. Click on save, and now we go back to our first child flow, click on the main scope, and in the apply to each loop we will create a new action, the run a child flow action, and there it is, our second child flow, the create PDF report. And of course this flow or this action needs an input because we want to provide it with the one-to-many, and this is basically the string, because we again need to provide it with a string output of our filter array, because we've got filtered data packages for each project that we want to send to our third flow. So that's all we need to adjust. Click on save. And of course, we again run into this error because I forget it every time. We need to insert the response. There it is, response. Click on save. Go back to the first child flow. The error disappeared. I can save it now because I've added this response here. And now let's have a test on these three flows. And therefore, I will add the Canvas app we've built in the first step to our solution. And now let's just test it with a small data set of, let's say, 100 rows and 10 projects to minimize the API calls. Okay, here are our three flows. The parent flow, which we will trigger from within our Power App. First child flow, which selects the appropriate data and loop through the apply to each loop. And our third flow, which we've set up to create the PDF report. I would just do it, let's say, for 100 rows, and just for testing purposes, minimize the number of projects. Comment this out to, say, 5 or 6 projects, generate sample data. So we've got 6 different projects and 100 rows. Click on generate PDF report. And of course, there's an error. So let's have a look into our parent flow. And I've run into this error quite often. So I would just reinsert this flow. Maybe this fixes the error. Make another test run on it. This looks better. Still an error, still failed, but it got triggered. So let's have a look on what's the error. Okay, and what might cause this error in our child flows and our parent flow is that we need to configure this run only users. So we can click on edit here and define this as use this connection. And now it's switched to the Kim@Mofa-Schuppen connection. And we will do the same in our child flows. And now let's again have a test on this, generate PDF report. And now the parent flow succeeded. Our first child flow also succeeded. Let's have a look on how much apply to each loops were created. So there you can see 6 apply to each loops. This is correct because we wanted to create 6 reports. And let's have a look on our third flow. So this looks also good. Also successfully it received this JSON, and now we can move on with creating our PDF document. In the first step, we will again edit our flow and insert another action, and we will search for the select action. And now we can select again from, we've got this one-to-many JSON here, and we will again use the JSON expression and our JSON one-to-many select from this. And what we now need to do, we need to map the columns we've defined in our Word template to the columns that we have in our JSON, which we will receive from the parent flow or from the first child flow in this case. Therefore, I will have a look on my Word document, and I called the project column Word project, the working hours column Word working hours. And the whole thing is called rep control, so the complete row. So I will go back to my select action, call it Word project and Word working hours. And now I can again select the item expression, put a question mark here, and select the project, and of course select the working hour. Quickly test this if we map this correctly. So we use a recently used trigger, and this looks good. Look at this wonderful JSON we have here from our child and parent flow. And now we click on edit again, and in the next step we will populate the Word document at another action, and we will look for Word Online and select the populate a Word template action. Now we can select the appropriate document library and location. We've saved this in a document library called bulk PDF reports, and the file is this template file. And now we've defined these controls into our Word template at the beginning. We've got two columns, the Word project as well as the Word working hours, and around these two columns we've defined this rep control, and we need this rep control now to populate our Word document. And therefore we click on switch to input entire array, because now we can input the whole array into this document. And that's the reason why we've defined, or why we've mapped these columns in the previous step. So now we will select the output of the select action, and that's basically all we need to do to populate our Word document. We will add another action, create file, and we will create a file in the same document library in this case. So I will give it a proper file name, just concat report with a underscore and with a UTC now timestamp, which I format like the year, the month, day, hours, minutes, and seconds. And of course, at the end, I need to use the file extension so that I've created in the correct format. In this case, I use the file extension, of course, to create a Word document. For the file content, I will use the Microsoft Word document from the populated Microsoft Word template action. Click on save. And now let's have a first test run on this. And if everything works properly, then there should be one Word report in the first step created after we've tested the flow. Let's make a test run on this. So the populated Word template was successfully, the file creation also successfully. And now let's have a look into our SharePoint document library, give it a refresh, and there it is, our Word report in the first step. And here you can see all the Asphalt Avengers and the working hours in the second column populated with this array in a Word document. And now we can click on edit again. And the last step we need to perform before we can send this file via email is we need to convert it to a PDF. And therefore we will use the Adobe connector and search for convert Word to PDF. And now Adobe wants some information for us, and the setup process is quite straightforward, so I will walk you through this right now. We can just copy and paste this URL. If you do not have an account, you need to create one. In my case, I would just create one for the EinfachMachen. So when you've created your account, you will have to verify your identity. Therefore, you got this code sent to your email address, and you just need to paste it into this window. And now you need to, of course, accept the terms of use, accepting and continuing. And now you can create your Adobe PDF Service API free trial. I will call this EinfachMachen. And this is basically a 6-month free trial with, I think, 1000 API calls per month. So that's important to know. So this is what it should look like in your Power Automate flow after you've entered all the credentials, and then you click on create and you have a valid Adobe PDF Services connection. And the next steps now are quite straightforward. We just have to select the name of the file we've just created and select the body of the file we've just created. And now one last step, we will insert the send email option because we want to send these PDF reports via mail. And now we can use a dynamic content here where I would just use a static value in this case, write a short message and then click on advanced, select the PDF file name and the PDF file content. And now the final step, as we did in our previous flows, we will integrate exception handling by using the scope action, the scope to the top, go to the previous flow and here copy the whole exception handling, click on new step, my clipboard, paste that in here, and now we've also implemented exception handling. Now we finally managed to create this 3-step flow, and let's have a test on whether it creates us one PDF document in the first place, and afterwards we will check if it creates us multiple PDF documents based on the data we select in our Power App. But first let's make a test on one PDF document, and if you got an error, you again have to define these run only users permissions. So in my case it should work now, and let's test this flow. And as we can see, the flow run was successfully. Let's have a look on our PDF, and there it is. You can see the PDF document. What I would do is adjust the colors and all this stuff afterwards. But as you can see, managed to convert this to a PDF document. I needed to insert another step in this case. Maybe someone knows a better way, but I have to insert this get file content using path and use the file content in this action instead of the body of the create file action. So this made it work for me. So we managed to create one PDF, and now finally let's test the whole flow creating multiple PDF documents. So I've cleaned the SharePoint document library. Here's just the template left. Here's our parent flow. Here's the select data flow, our selector, and here's the creator flow. So the last step, which gets triggered multiple times. And now let's make a test on it with our 6 different projects. So the last flow should get triggered 6 times in the end. Create the sample data and click on generate PDF report. Let's have a look on our parent flow, already running. This one is also running. And as we can see, here are the 6 PDF reports which we've wanted to create from within our Power App. So let's give it one last try, creating up to 50 documents, and let's see if this works also. So we will use all projects we've got in our collection. Click again on create sample, do up to 500 rows. Now we've got 500 rows and 50 different projects. So in the end, there should be 50 PDF reports be generated and sent to our Outlook email account. Click on PDF report, and as we can see, the flow got triggered. The second flow also got triggered, and our third flow might be already generating some PDF reports for us. So our flow is finished, and the whole thing took about 8 minutes, what is compared to my first attempts trying to make this use case of a bulk creation work, a great improvement. And if we take a look into our inbox, we can see there are 50 new reports generated and sent to us via email. So in the next step, we could improve this with an automation or send this dynamically to different stakeholders, project managers, or whatever you want. But just to make this workflow work, this is how you can do it. And this brings us to the summary of today's video. So first of all, why use the bulk PDF report creation? I think we're currently living in a transition from the paper-based to a digital world, and this was an actual customer requirement. We wanted to help the people and prevent them from clicking on a button for, let's say, 50-60 times and generate this automatic reporting. I don't claim this to be a perfect solution. If you have any ideas to improve this workflow, please leave me a comment, share it to me. I took this as a learning curve and tried my best to generate a not too complex workflow from this customer requirement. The second question, why use child flows? And this was my biggest learning curve, to be honest. I could break down the complexity, because if you think about doing all these actions I'm now doing in 3 different flows in one flow, you can imagine how large and big and bad to maintain this flow might be. So the one thing is breaking down complexity complexity, and by breaking down complexity, of course, I can simplify the workflow design, enhance the reusability. For example, if I want to create single PDF reports, I can take this last workflow we've created for the PDF report creation and just use it in my Power App without having to change things, because I've decoupled it from the rest of the workflow. Another advantage, in my opinion, is the easier maintenance, debugging, error handling, and testing. I can test single workflows, single actions, because all these flows are not too complex. And the last thing, I've mentioned it earlier, I could prevent using multiple loops. There's just one apply to each loop where I create the different data packages, and I could also enhance performance from about 30 minutes or 45 minutes to 8 minutes to create 50 reports and send them to my inbox. Hopefully this solution might be useful for one or another. Thank you very much for watching this, for sharing your opinions in the comments with me, and see you in the next video.